Today we are making paper peonies. Hi and welcome back to my craft room. My name is Kelsey. I also go by Dinosaur Mama, and today we are making paper peonies. I wanted to bring you a spring flower, and the peony was the first thing that popped in my head. So we will go step by step on how to create these. They are actually pretty easy to go together. You're going to use a ball tool to shape them, and if you don't have that, you can always use a measuring spoon. That's what I used to use before I ordered my ball tools from Temu. So if you're ready, let's jump over into Cricut Design Space, and then I'll also show you the setup in Silhouette Studio before we get started on assembly. So the first thing we're going to do is resize this. I did make one peony that was relatively large, like close to 6 inches, and then I made a few that were smaller. So the whole thing, I'm just gonna resize to 18 inches wide, and that will give us a flower that's 4.5, and I thought this was a good size. So you can make these however you want. I do include leaves. If you want to use them to make a stemmed flower, you can. If you don't want them, then all you have to do is just go in here and delete. Other than that, everything is ready to go, and you can send over to your machine to cut. I use the medium cardstock setting, and I cut these out with both textured cardstock and just a regular plain 65-pound cardstock. So you'll see both versions of those. I actually preferred the lighter cardstock for them. I just felt like the petals looked more realistic. So let's look at the Silhouette Studio setup as well. So our Silhouette Studio setup is going to be pretty similar. The first thing we're gonna do is grab the whole thing, and again, I'm gonna make it 18 inches. I use their little side thing, and I just pull it down. And you can resize these however you want. Now, the next thing is you want to have it on your mat, whatever you're cutting. So I have the electrostatic mat, and the paper I'm using is going to be 12 by 12. So I'm gonna pull on all of my petals. And what I'm going to do is one of my favorite features in Silhouette Studio is the nesting feature here, and I'm just going to hit nest. And now this is ready to be cut. So I would send it over, and obviously I would change any of my settings. Now for my settings, I use the heavy cardstock, the 80-pound, and I usually end up playing with my settings. I usually up the blade depth and the force, but you need to test your own paper and your own settings. And when you're ready to move on to the next part of your design, what I usually do is I actually go back to the design area, and you can grab your next set, go to nest, and just nest the next set. And then pull that off after you cut, and then nest again. So it's pretty easy to set up, and then you'll send it over and cut. So once you have everything cut out, we can get started on assembly. All right, so I have my foam sheets out. I don't have a pad. I just use 2 foam sheets stacked on top of each other, and I'm using my ball tool in a circular pattern around each petal to give it some roundness, and you can make sure you go over the edges to give them a nice, like, kind of crinkly look like you would a real petal of a flower. And honestly, I'm doing like pretty decent pressure on this, and these pink ones are the textured paper. It's a little hard to see from far away, but these are 80-pound cardstock, and it is textured. When the like yellowish cream colored ones up top, those are the 65-pound paper. Obviously those were a little bit easier to use my ball tool with because they're thinner. And I also went through on the center, if you just saw there, and used my ball tool to round the center as well to give these peonies like a very round, curling look to them, because that's how peonies are. So I did this with every single petal, and on the textured ones, I did 1 at a time. On the 65-pound, I was able to do 2 at a time. However, you do need a decent amount of pressure, so I ended up going back over some of them if they were doubled to make sure that they were nice and rounded. I'm also using my fingers to give them a little bit of roundness, and then see, I just do a round in the center as well. So you're going to do this for all of the layers of your petals. And so now I'm going to start on my center, and you're gonna have 4 pieces, and I used craft glue to glue these together. There's like a little end flap to glue. I almost did the wrong side there. And you're going to glue them together so that all 4 are attached. You can cut more of these if you feel like you want a fuller center. I thought 4 was enough. I also made them on the shorter side. That way, if you don't have the right size paper, or if you want to make these bigger, it'll still fit on your piece of paper. So I'm just gluing these together, and then I'm gonna take my tweezers, but you can also use a quilling tool to roll this up. And I only just start like slightly with my tweezers to roll it up, and then I grab it with my fingers and just start rolling towards the end. And what this does is it makes like a nice curl. You don't want it too tight. You want it to have a little bit of freedom to move. You know, because if it's too tight, you really can't pull it out too much, those top little pieces. And so I'm just going to use my fingers to kind of keep it even and roll it all up. I personally don't glue this as I go along, because once I add the hot glue to the bottom, it's definitely not going to unravel or change any sort of like height. So I don't glue as I go along, but you definitely can. And then at the end, I just glue the flap shut with a little bit of craft glue. I tried doing this with hot glue, and I just felt like the hot glue was too bulky, and then I ended up getting hot glue strings everywhere. So once it's dry, we can move on to our next part. So I flipped my petals over, and there are 2 different kinds of petals, 3 of each. Ones that are a little bit fuller, and then ones that are thinner. Like you'll see more of a gap in between the petals. So just keep that in mind. Those go towards the top, and the fatter ones go in the bottom. And I'm using my hot glue now. You can still use your craft glue if you want to for this. And I am just interlocking my petals, just a little bit of glue, and then I kind of like counter turn them so that the petals sort of overlap. I think that makes sense the way I'm saying it. So you don't really have any gaps in space in terms of this. And you're just gonna do this for all 6 layers. Try to be as careful as possible. You see I just dropped it. You don't want to have hot glue everywhere. And I actually made a mistake and put my center in upside down at first. I was so upset with myself. I was like, you've got to be joking me on my last flower. Of course I drop it in wrong. So you see that these ones have a bigger gap in between the petals. Those are going to be the ones that go on top. They're just slightly smaller, and you can always make more smaller if you want to. I just provided 6. I felt like this was a nice full flower. And now you put a little bit of hot glue in the center and glue your center down. So here is my center. I'm placing it in, and you just want it to settle down. My biggest thing is that if you're using hot glue, just be careful, because the layers of hot glue, one, are going to take longer to dry because, right, they're all hot and keeping each other warm, so they're not super dry yet. But there's our finished peony. They go together super fast. Again, I liked the way the 65-pound paper looked a little bit better, but in the video, you can't really tell any difference. They're super cute. And if you want to, you can add on your calyx at the bottom. I just pinched these with my hands and then glued them on only at the center. Like I didn't glue the leaves down to the flower, just the center. So like a dot of hot glue, and then glued it on to the bottom. That way the leaves kind of like stayed out more still. And you can of course add on a floral wire and the leaves that I attached that I gave as well if you wanted to have a stemmed flower. And here are the 2 sizes for reference as well. Thank you so much for joining me today as we made our paper peonies. I hope you enjoyed making them. If you like this craft, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It helps me so much. If you aren't subscribed yet, please think about doing so. That way I can continue to bring you new crafty projects every single week. And share this with one of your crafty friends if they need a little bit of spring in their life. I will see you next week in my craft room, and stay crafty.